The last money I had in the world was $704.11, and I knew the number to the penny, the way you know a fuel gauge on a stretch of road with no exits. I want to tell you about the morning I went in to close that account, because a man behind a desk looked at a screen and the color went out of his face, and I was probably the only customer that bank had who knew exactly what he was looking at. Not because I'm clever, because for 29 years I fixed the machines on the other side of that counter, and I have stood behind more tellers than I can count, watching that exact screen load while a cash recycler warmed up beside me. My name is Russ Kadera. This is Colwyn Mills, Ohio, 19,000 people and a river that used to be worth something. And this is the story of 11 weeks, a milk crate of spiral notebooks, and $412 that were never supposed to be findable. They let 14 of us go on the 4th of May, in a room in Sandusky with a whiteboard nobody had erased from the week before. And the thing I keep coming back to is that somebody had put out coffee, not a carafe. A real setup. The air pots and the little tub of creamers and a plate of those grocery store danishes with the fruit that glows. Van der Grift Currency Systems had never once put out coffee for a morning meeting in the 29 years I worked there. And when I came in and saw it, I understood the whole shape of the day before anybody said a word. Guy from corporate, name tag still creased from the printer, talked about the third Meridian contract going to a national vendor out of Charlotte, about consolidation, about how proud they were of the service record in this region. He used the word transition 11 times. I counted, because counting is what I do with my hands when they've got nothing else. 6 weeks of severance, keys to van 6 on the table by the door, and would we please leave the fuel cards. Here is what I actually did for 29 years, since almost nobody knows this job exists. When you walk into a branch and the teller feeds your deposit into a slot in the counter, and it takes maybe 4 seconds, that's a cash recycler, a safe with a brain that reads every bill, checks it 4 ways, sorts it by denomination, remembers it, and hands it back out to the next customer. There are coin sorters, note validators, the drop safes in the back, the ATM in the vestibule with its own weather problems. All of it fails in small, boring, specific ways, and when it does, somebody drives out in a van with a tool bag and a laptop and makes it stop failing. That was me, 106 machines across 4 counties, and I want you to understand that I was good at it, not sentimental about it. Good at it. I could tell you which branch had a humidity problem from the reject rate before I ever opened the cabinet, and I wrote everything down. 31 spiral notebooks, the 70-cent kind in a milk crate in the closet of the second bedroom, one for roughly every 11 months since 1997. Time on site, time off, serial, symptom, what I actually did, what I actually saw. I didn't always write down this much. What made it a religion was March of 2003, when $2,000 came up missing at a branch in Fostoria on a day I'd had the drop safe open, and for 9 days I was a man being politely not accused of something while the district manager kept saying nobody was accusing anybody. What saved me was 4 lines in a notebook, arrival time, the name of the assistant manager who unlocked the vault room and stayed with me, the time she left for lunch, the time the safe went back online. 9 days of my life, and it ended in about 90 seconds once somebody read those 4 lines. I have never in my life stopped writing things down since. My daughter thinks it's a personality flaw. She's 26, and she's not entirely wrong. The layoff itself I could live with. What I could not get my arms around was the 90 days after, which went like this: 41 applications, 4 phone screens, 2 interviews, and a young man at a logistics company in Findlay telling me, kindly, that he was worried I'd be bored. My last direct deposit hit on the 5th of June. Everything else kept going the way it always had, because that's the whole design of it. The insurance draft, the phone, the 2 streaming things June set up for me that I never learned to cancel, the $12 a month for a parts database subscription I'd been paying out of my own pocket since 2011 because Van der Grift wouldn't. Sometime in the middle of July, I stopped opening the bank app, the way you stop looking at a wound while it's still doing whatever it's doing. And when I finally did open it, on the 3rd of August, sitting at the kitchen table on Sedge Street with the window unit running, the number said $704.11, and something underneath the number was wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. The way a machine sounds wrong before you can tell anybody why. I closed the app. I got my good jacket out of the closet, the grey one, the one I wore to my mother's funeral and to June's associate degree ceremony, and I decided that in the morning I was going to go take my money out of that bank and keep it in a coffee can, like my grandmother, because whatever was happening in there I could not afford to be inside it anymore. The 3rd Meridian branch on Ferron Street was one of mine. I want to be clear about what that means, because it's not sentiment. I knew that building's machines the way you know a house you've re-roofed. The recycler behind the second teller station was a Talaris serial ending in 4471, installed 2014, and it had a note path alignment issue every February when the heat ran dry and the paper got brittle, and I had fixed it 11 times and finally shimmed the transport myself with a strip of stainless I cut in my own garage because the factory part was on a 9-week back order. The ATM out front had been hit by a truck mirror in 2021. I put in the new bezel. There's a scratch on the underside of the cash drawer housing that's mine from a screwdriver from 2016, and I know it's mine because I wrote down that I'd done it. Ruth Ann Pike has been a teller there for 22 years, and she's the one who used to unlock the vestibule for me at 6:40 in the morning when I had to be in Tiffin by 9. And when I came in that Tuesday in my funeral jacket, she said, "Russ Kadera," in the voice you'd use for a cousin at a wake. I told her what I wanted. Close it out, take it in cash, 20s are fine. She started typing, and I watched her face do something small, a hitch, a half-second where the eyes stop tracking the screen and go still on one spot. And I want you to know that I recognize that exact expression, because I've seen it on the face of every teller who has ever had a machine do something in front of a customer that she doesn't have a word for. She said, "Let me get Dane." Dane Quillen was 34 and had been the branch manager for 2 years, and he came out with the walk they teach them, the one where you button the jacket on the way. He was decent to me. I want that on the record because it matters later. He said he was sorry to hear about Vandergrift, that his father had done 31 years at Whirlpool in Marion, and he knew what that was, and then he turned Ruth Ann's monitor a few degrees and started scrolling, and I stood there with my hands on the counter like a man waiting for weather. On that platform, the account view has a history pane on the right and a small field up in the corner that holds an internal code, 5 characters, grey on grey, and I have watched that screen paint itself while a recycler across the room ran its startup count more times than I could ever put a number to. I know what field that is. I know that most days it's empty. And I watched Dane Quillen's eyes go up to that corner and stop, and I watched the blood leave his face, actually leave it from the cheekbones down, the way it does, so that a man in a good shirt in an air-conditioned building suddenly looks like he's been standing out in the cold. He didn't say anything for about 4 seconds. Then he said, "Mr. Kadera, can you come back Thursday?" And I asked him why, and he said something about the closure needing an officer's sign-off and the system being slow this morning. And neither of those things is true, and both of us knew that at least one of us knew it. I said, "Dane, what's in the corner field?" His hand actually moved toward the monitor, which told me more than anything he could have said. He told me he wasn't able to discuss internal coding with customers. He told me he'd look into some of these charges personally. He shook my hand and his was cold. I walked out onto Ferron Street with $704.11 still inside that building, and no money in my pocket at all, and I was halfway to the truck when Ruth Ann caught the door behind me and came out into the heat with a folded piece of paper. 60 days of transaction history, printed, which is a thing any customer can request. She'd printed it before Dane came out. She put it in my hand and said, "That's just how it posts, hon," in a voice that had absolutely nothing in it, and went back inside. In the truck, I unfolded it, and the first thing my eye went to wasn't a dollar amount. It was a code stamped in the header block, in the corner where they put things customers don't read, EXC 2019 CONV. I did what I do with any machine that's throwing an error nobody believes. I took a clean notebook out of the crate, number 32, first page, and I wrote the date and the time I sat down, 2:14 p.m., because if you don't stamp the start, you'll lie to yourself about how long it took. And I built a timeline. Not a story, a timeline. Every posting on that printout got a line, date, description, amount, running balance, and a column on the right for what the bank charged me for it. 60 days took me until 9 that night, with the window unit going and a bologna sandwich I forgot to eat. And when I was done, I had 18 charges that weren't purchases. 10 of them were $36 each. That's the overdraft fee. One was $10, which is the returned item fee, for the same insurance draft that had already been hit with a 36 once. And then a 7-day run of $6 a day, which is a thing called extended overdraft, which is a fee for still being overdrawn, which is to say a fee for being broke, charged daily to a man whose paycheck had stopped. 360, 10, 42, $412 between the 8th of June and the 3rd of August. Now, I want to be honest with you about my first reaction, because it wasn't outrage, it was shame. That's the part they don't put in these stories. I sat there at my own kitchen table at 53 years old, and the loudest voice in my head said, "You did this. You didn't cancel the streaming. You didn't watch the balance. You let a $9.99 charge for a service you have never once used, pull $36 out of a man with no job, and then you let it happen 9 more times. And if you were half as sharp as you tell yourself you are, you'd have caught it in the first week." I sat with that for about an hour. Then the other part of me, the part that has been paid for 29 years to not accept the first explanation, picked up the printout again and asked the only question that has ever gotten me anywhere. Is the machine doing what it says it does? Because I had never opted in. Overdraft coverage on a debit card is not automatic. You have to say yes to it. There's a rule, it's older than my truck, and the yes has to be affirmative. I had banked at that branch since it was Colwyn Building and Savings, since 1998, and in 28 years I had never once said yes to anything I did not have to say yes to. I am not a yes man, asked my ex-wife. June came by Sunday with a rotisserie chicken, which is what she brings when she's checking on me and doesn't want to say she's checking on me. My daughter is 26. She runs the night desk at a towing outfit out on 224, and in January she started the sonography program at the community college in Fremont, which is the first thing in her whole life she has wanted out loud. 2 years, and at the end of it she's an ultrasound tech, which is a real job with a real number attached, and she has done every single piece of the paperwork herself, without asking me for a dime, which I am proud of, and which also sits in my chest like a stone. She told me over the chicken that the clinical placement fee is due the 15th of September, $610, background check and liability and the scrubs. She said it the way you mention weather. She had $400 saved. I had $704 in a bank that was eating it at $6 a day, and a checking account I couldn't close. And I sat across from my kid and said, "We'll figure it out," which is the sentence fathers use when the true sentence is unavailable. She left at 8. I was out on the back steps with the notebook when Alma Ferrar came around the hedge in her housecoat with her mail in her hand, which she does about twice a week, and normally it's about the raccoons. Alma is 71. She managed the cafeteria at Colwyn Mills Elementary for 33 years. She has a greenhouse in the side yard that her husband Dell built out of storm windows in 1994, and that she has kept running every winter of the 9 years since he died on kerosene, on a budget I do not want to think about. She sat down on the step below me with a grunt and said she'd heard from Ruth Ann's sister that I was having a problem with the bank. Then she said, and I remember the exact words because I wrote them in the notebook that night, "Russell, I don't want to be a bother, but could you look at mine? I can't make the numbers on it come out, and I've stopped being able to tell if that's the bank or if that's me." And she handed me a bank statement that had been folded into quarters and refolded so many times the crease had gone furry. It took me 20 minutes at the kitchen table under the good light, with Alma sitting across from me not touching her tea. Her Social Security lands on the 3rd Wednesday. Her kerosene delivery, $182, auto pays on the 11th. In the 4 months between those two facts and a Medicare supplement draft that moves around by a day or two, that woman had been charged 12 overdraft fees of $36 each, $432. Alma Ferrar had paid this bank $432 for the privilege of the bank, paying her kerosene bill 8 days before her money got there, which she had never asked it to do, which she would have said no to if anybody had ever asked her, because Alma Ferrar is a woman who once made me wait on the porch while she counted out 60 cents she thought she owed me from 2011. When I got to the total, I didn't say it right away. I said, "Alma, did anybody ever ask you if you wanted them to cover you when you're short?" And she looked at me like I'd asked her if she wanted them to come mow her lawn, and she said, "Cover me? Honey, if I'm short, I'm short. I'd just wait for the third Wednesday." And then, after a second, in a smaller voice, she said, "Is that what all that was?" Here's the thing that happened in my chest, and I've had 11 weeks to think about how to say it. It was not anger, exactly. It was recognition, which is worse. Because when Alma said, "I'd just wait for the third Wednesday," I stopped being a man with a personal problem, a man who'd been careless with his own account during the worst summer of his life, a man who probably deserved some percentage of what happened to him, and I became something much simpler, which is a technician looking at 2 units in 2 different locations, throwing the identical error code. That is not a customer problem. In 29 years, I have never once seen 2 machines fail the same way in the same week, for 2 different reasons. When it happens, it is never the machine. It is the firmware, or it is the install, or it is something somebody did to a whole population of units at one time. I got out notebook 32 and I wrote, at the top of a clean page, 2 units, same code. And then, under it, because I already half knew, EXC 2019 Conv. I went looking for a third. I found it at the laundromat on Cass, which is where Teo Salcedo parks his truck on Thursdays. El Cardenal, 2-item menu, best al pastor in 3 counties, a 33-year-old man with a business degree from a school he still owes money to, and a dream of a brick and mortar he has been 13 months from for about 4 years. I bought 2 tacos I couldn't afford, and asked him a question I'd been rehearsing in the truck, which was whether he'd ever gotten a $36 charge from Third Meridian. Teo laughed at me. It wasn't a nice laugh. He went into the truck and came back with a folder, an actual folder because he's a business, he keeps his paper, and in 11 months of running 80 and 90 small transactions a week on a thin account, that man had paid $1,116 in overdraft fees, 31 of them. He said, "That's the cost of being small, man. Everybody knows that." And I said, "Teo, did you sign up for the coverage?" And he stopped, and he said, "You sign up for it, it's a checking account." 3 units, same code. All 3 of us, and I checked this that same night, had one thing in common that had nothing to do with money. All 3 of us had been customers of Colwyn Building and Savings, the little 3-branch outfit on Ferron Street, before Third Meridian bought it. And that's when I remembered the tubs, because I was there. October of 2019, the conversion weekend when they cut the old Colwyn accounts over to the Third Meridian core. Friday night through Sunday, the whole system down, and Vandergrift had me on site both days to reprogram the recyclers and the ATM to talk to the new host, which is a 2-day job of firmware and test transactions, and a lot of standing around waiting for somebody in Columbus to release a batch. I was in that building for 19 hours that weekend. I remember the pizza. I remember a kid in a Third Meridian polo, 27 years old, running the conversion table in the back with a headset on, and I remember, because I had to carry a 200-pound cabinet dolly down that hallway and I couldn't get through, 2 grey postal tubs sitting on the floor of the northeast corridor full of mail, envelopes, hundreds of them, still sealed. And I remember asking the kid in the polo where he wanted them so I could get my dolly by. And I remember what he said because it was funny at the time. "Leave 'em. That's the ones who wrote back." I sat straight up on my own couch at 11:40 at night 11 weeks ago with that sentence in my mouth. That's the ones who wrote back. And the kid in the polo, 27 years old with a headset on, running the table, I had shaken his cold hand across a counter 9 days before. It was Dane Quillen. I called Vandergrift Dispatch at 7 the next morning to ask if my 2019 service tickets were still in the archive, because a ticket has a date and a site and a narrative field, and mine would say what I saw in that hallway. Marv Euler, who has run that warehouse since Clinton, told me sure they're in the annex, boxes of them. Then he said the second thing, in the flat voice of a man reading a memo off a wall. Corporate had scheduled the annex for purge. The shredding contractor was booked for the 2nd of October. 7 weeks. The Vandergrift warehouse sits on Depot Road in Sandusky behind a chain-link fence with a gate that has never once been locked, and I had driven through that gate maybe 900 times in 29 years without ever thinking about it. And then I drove through it on a Wednesday morning in August as a man who did not work there and thought about nothing else. That is a specific kind of small death, and I want to describe it accurately because I think a lot of people know it and nobody ever puts it into words. It isn't shame exactly. It's that the building doesn't change. The gravel makes the same sound. The loading dock still has the orange stripe I helped repaint in 2009 when the safety auditor came. You are the only thing in the picture that has been edited out, and the picture does not appear to have noticed. I parked by the propane cage where I had always parked, and then I moved the truck, because it wasn't my spot anymore and I did not want anybody to have to tell me that. Marv Euler has run that warehouse since Clinton, which is his own line, not mine, and he is 61 years old with a bad shoulder and a lanyard with about 40 keys on it, and he came out of the parts cage wiping his hands on a rag and looked at me for a second too long. "They didn't take your badge," he said. It was a question and a joke and an apology all in one, which is how men our age handle things we don't have vocabulary for. I told him what I wanted. The 2019 tickets for Region 4, October, mine. I told him I wasn't going to take anything. I wasn't going to copy anything he'd get in trouble for. And I would sign whatever visitor's log he had. Marv looked at his boots. He explained his situation without ever once saying it, the way careful men do. He's 14 months from 62 and change. The annex is his last assignment before they close that building, and the purge order came down through corporate and has a number on it and his name under it. Then he unclipped one key off the lanyard, set it on the dock rail and said he had to go do a physical inventory in the other building, and it usually took him about 2 hours. And if a man wandered into the pole barn and looked at paper that had his own handwriting on it, Marv Euler did not have eyes in the back of his head. He walked off. He did not look back, which I understood was the kindest available version of what he was doing. The annex is a pole barn with no air moving in it, and a wasp nest in the eave over the west door, and the tickets live in bankers' boxes on steel shelving, filed by year, then by region, then by month, and each box is 100 and some hard copies with the yellow carbon still stapled to the back. I want to tell you what it is like to stand in a 200-foot aisle of your own handwriting. 1999 is up on the top shelf where you need the rolling ladder. 2004 is at eye level. I pulled the October 2019 box for Region 4 and set it on a pallet and knelt down on the concrete like a man at a very boring altar, and I went through it ticket by ticket, and every single one of them was a day of my life. Coin sorter, Bellevue, jam in the escalator track 40 minutes. Note validator, Attica, customer complaint, unfounded, unit within spec. A whole Thursday in Norwalk on a recycler that turned out to have a dead mouse in the reject bin. My hands were shaking a little, and I told myself it was the heat, and then I found it. Ticket 1910-0447, dated October 12th and 13th, site 3rd Meridian Ferron Street. 19 hours across 2 days, core conversion support, and down in the narrative field where they gave you 6 lines and nobody ever used more than 2, there was this. Typed off my own field notes by a dispatcher named Sheila, who has since moved to Arizona, knee corridor obstructed. 2 USPS gray tubs, sealed mail, T3M conversion, rep advised leave in place, dolly rerouted via vestibule, 22 mine delay billable, C photo. C photo. That's the part that put me on the floor, and I mean that with no drama at all. I sat down on the concrete with my back against the shelf. Since 2014, Vandergrift's policy was that any delay over 15 minutes billed to the client had to be documented with a photograph, taken on the tech laptop's camera, uploaded to the ticket before you closed it, because a client will absolutely fight you over 22 minutes, and a picture ends the fight in 1 second. I took that picture. I know I took it, because I closed that ticket, and you could not close a ticket with a billable delay and no attachment. The form wouldn't let you. So I turned the ticket over, and where the photo block prints there was a grey rectangle about 1.5 inches square with the words image on file and a reference number, and nothing else, because the archive printer never printed images, it printed the reference, and the reference points at the field service system. which Vandergrift shut off in 2022 when they migrated everything to the new platform out of Charlotte. I remember the email. I remember the line in the email because I read it on my phone in a parking lot in Tiffin between calls and thought, well, that's somebody else's problem. Attachments prior to 01/2020 will not be migrated. And the laptop that took the picture went back in a plastic tote on the table by the door in Sandusky, along with the keys to van 6 and the fuel card on the 4th of May. I photographed every page of that ticket with my phone, front and back, in the light from the west door, and then I put the box back on the shelf square with the others, the way you leave a job site, and I sat in the truck in the gravel for a while. Because here is what I had and what I didn't. I had a company record, dated 2019, that said 2 tubs of sealed mail were in that hallway, and that a third Meridian conversion rep told me to leave them there. I did not have a picture of them. I did not have the tubs, and a narrative field on a service ticket is a strong thing to hold and a thin thing to wave, because any lawyer in the state of Ohio can stand up and say that a technician wrote down that he saw some mail, and mail in a bank is not a crime. And what exactly is the allegation? Marv came back at the 2-hour mark, right on the nose, and I told him I was square and thanked him, and he asked if I got what I needed, and I said I got half of it. Then he said the other thing. He said the purge order for the annex came down 11 days after the third Meridian contract transitioned to the national vendor, and that in 31 years he had never been told to destroy service records for a client that was still an active site. Because service history is what you sue over and what you get sued over. I want to be careful here, and I was careful in the notebook that night, and I'll be careful now. I do not know that anybody at any bank ever asked anybody at Vandergrift to shred anything. I never learned that. I never will. All I can tell you is what a man who had been doing that job since Clinton said out loud on a loading dock, which is that it was the first time in his career and that he did not like it, and that the shredding contractor was booked for the 2nd of October, which as of that Wednesday was 44 days away. I want to be honest about the 4 weeks between that Wednesday and the 15th of September, because the money part of this is the part that people leave out when they tell stories like this, and leaving it out is a lie that makes everybody watching feel worse about their own life. June's clinical placement fee was $610, due the 15th, no extensions, and she had $400 saved out of a night desk paycheck. I had $704.11 inside a building I could not get it out of, and it was going down $6 a day. I had $200 and change in cash in the coffee can I had actually gone and bought, which is funnier now than it was then. So I did the arithmetic every married man and divorced man does, which is the arithmetic of what you own. The truck is a 2006, and it is worth more to me than to anybody else, which is the definition of a bad asset. Del Ferrar's old rototiller that Alma made me take, and the tool bag. 29 years of buying my own hand tools because the company-issue drivers were soft and stripped out on the security screws, a snap-on set I paid for $11 a week out of my own check for 2 years in 1998 and 1999. I drove down to the pawn on Water Street on a Tuesday and had a man in his 30s open the roll and pick up the 1/4-inch ratchet and turn it in the light and offer me $240 for the whole thing. And I said thank you, and closed the roll and drove home. And I sat in the driveway and I was angrier at myself for going down there than I was at anybody at any bank. Then I wrote it in the notebook, with the time, because if I don't write down the ugly parts, the record isn't a record. It's a brochure. Thursday, at the branch, Dane Quillen put me in the little conference room they call Office 2, which has a laminate table and 4 chairs, and a framed photograph of a covered bridge that is not anywhere near Colwyn Mills. He had a folder, and he had clearly been told what to say by somebody because he said it in a slightly different voice than the one he'd used about his father. Third Meridian, he said, had reviewed my account as a courtesy. They were prepared to refund all 18 assessments, $360, $10 and $42, $412, plus $100 as a goodwill credit for the inconvenience, and to close the account same day with a cashier's check for the full balance, $704.11. No closing fee. $512 more than I had walked in with. He slid it across the table, and then he slid one more sheet across behind it, a single page, and he said it was just standard, that everybody signs one, that it was really just an acknowledgement that the matter was resolved. I read it. I read it twice, because I have spent my life reading schematics, and there is no such thing as a page you read once. It was a release. 4 numbered paragraphs, and paragraph 3 said that in exchange for the consideration described above, the undersigned releases and forever discharges the institution from any and all claims, known and unknown, arising from or relating to the account, including without limitation the courtesy coverage election and the accuracy or completeness of the election file. Capital E, capital F. I looked at those 2 words for a long time, and then I asked Dane Quillen what an election file was. He said it was a standard term. I asked him standard where, and he said it was legal language and he wasn't a lawyer. So I asked him the only question that mattered, which is a question every single person watching this is allowed to ask, and almost nobody knows they're allowed to ask. I said, "Then send me mine." I said I wanted a copy of my own election, the document with my own name on it where I said yes to a thing that took $412 out of me, and I would take the check and sign his paper the same hour it arrived. And I watched a 34-year-old man in a good shirt do the arithmetic of his entire career in about 3 seconds. He said he'd have to request it from records. I said, "In writing, please." He said he would put in the request. Then he stopped being the voice they'd given him, and he was just a guy in a room with a 53-year-old customer, and he said quietly, looking at the covered bridge that isn't anywhere near here, "Mr. Kadera, take the money." And then a beat later, "A lot of this stuff goes back before I was here," which was not true. He was here. He was 27 years old with a headset on running the conversion table in the back, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I am nearly certain that he knew exactly what I knew, and that he had known it since the moment his face went white, and that he had spent the 16 days since then hoping I was just a man with a grievance about fees. I did not sign it. I stood up and thanked him, actually thanked him, because he had been decent to me in a job that was not letting him be decent, and I walked out through the lobby past Ruth Ann Pike, who was counting a strap of 20s with her jaw set so hard you could see the muscle, and she did not look up. And I understood that too. Then I sat in the truck on Ferrand Street and had the worst 10 minutes of the whole 11 weeks, because I had just turned down $512. 26 days before my daughter needed $610, on principle, which is a word that is very easy to spend when the rent is paid and very expensive at 2:15 on a Thursday afternoon in August. And anybody who tells you they'd have walked out of that room without their hands shaking is telling you a story about a man they have never met. I sat there and made the case for going back in. Take it, pay the girl's fee, let it be Alma's problem. Alma has a greenhouse and a dead husband's insurance, and she's 71. What are you? The county. And what stopped me was not courage. I want to be exact about this, because it's the most useful thing I've got to give anybody. What stopped me was that I did not know what an election file was. That's all. There was a hole in my understanding of the machine, and in 29 years I have never once been able to walk away from a hole in my understanding of a machine. So I got out notebook 32, and I wrote the date and the time, and what was offered and what was said and what I did. And then I turned to a clean page and printed 2 words at the top in block capitals and underlined them twice, election file. And I knew, sitting there, that there was exactly one person alive who might tell me what those words meant, and that her name had been written down in my own hand in a spiral notebook in a milk crate in the closet of the 2nd bedroom since March of 2003. Notebook 7 is the one with the water stain across the bottom third from a leak in van 2, and I have kept it for 23 years for one reason, which is that it is the notebook that saved me. March of 2003, Fostoria branch. $2,000 missing from a drop safe on a day I had the cabinet open for a bill path replacement. 9 days of a district manager telling me on the phone that nobody was accusing anybody in the tone of voice a man uses when everybody is accusing somebody. And on the page for March 11th, in a hand that was steadier than mine is now, 752 RR 8004, Volt RM unlocked by ASST MGRC backs, remained on site W Tech per policy. 1140C, backs to lunch, Volt RM secured, Tech to lobby. 115 safe back online, count witnessed, 4 lines. That is all it took, because those 4 lines meant I was not alone in that room for a single minute, that the safe was open, and Corinne Bax confirmed every one of them, and she did not have to, and she did it in about 90 seconds and then went back to work. I never properly thanked her. I sent a card, which is what a 30-year-old man in 2003 thought a thank you was. The Fostoria branch is an insurance office now. June found her. That's the part I want on the record, because I had spent 2 weeks treating my daughter like weather I was trying to keep off of her, and she came by on a Sunday, and I finally told her the whole thing. All of it. The 412 and Alma and the tubs and the release I didn't sign, and I braced for her to be angry about the $512. She wasn't. She said, "Gee, Dad, you turned down money because you didn't understand something. That's the most you thing that has ever happened." And then she asked what the woman's name was, and she took out her phone at the kitchen table, and inside of 4 minutes she said, "Terra State, Fremont Campus, adjunct. She teaches banking operations and compliance Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 to 9. Same campus where my kid does her anatomy lab. My daughter runs the night desk at a towing outfit on 224 and takes 60 calls a shift from people having the worst hour of their week, and she can find anybody. And it had not occurred to me to ask her, and I want every parent watching this to sit with that for a second, because I have thought about it a great deal since. We met at a coffee place on Croggan Street on a Thursday at 4:30 before her class. Corinne Bax is 58. She left banking in 2011 after 26 years. She does days at a credit union in Tiffin and teaches 2 nights a week, and she has reading glasses on a chain and a way of not filling silence. She remembered me before I finished the sentence. She said, "You're the one who wrote everything down." Then she said, "That's why I remembered the times. You'd have gotten them from me anyway." I told her about the fees and about Alma and Theo, and about all 3 of us being Legacy Colwyn, and she listened without saying anything for a long time, turning her cup, and when I said the 2 words off Dane Quillen's release, she set the cup down. She explained it plainly, and I'm going to give it to you the way she gave it to me, because it is the whole spine of this story. Overdraft coverage is opt-in, not opt-out. The customer has to affirmatively elect it, and the bank has to be able to produce the customer's election. That's the file. In a core conversion, when you're moving 11,000 legacy accounts onto a new platform overnight, you can't carry over a consent you never had, so you mail everyone a packet with an election form, and the ones that come back get imaged and keyed into the new core with an operator ID and a batch number and a date. And then she said the sentence that made my ears ring because it was said in my language. "Russ, every returned form gets a batch number in sequence. If somebody didn't key a couple of tubs worth, there is a gap in the sequence. You don't need the mail, you need the batch log. You don't need the mail, you need the batch log." That is the exact same thing as saying you don't need to see the jam. You need the reject counts. And I had been chasing physical evidence like an amateur for 2 weeks because I wanted the tubs so badly I could taste it. She was clear about her limits, and I respected her for it. She said she would not call anybody. She would not write anything. She has a mortgage and a son at Ohio State and 26 years of her own reputation, and she was not going to spend it. What she would do is tell me what a person is entitled to ask for and exactly what to call it. And she wrote it out for me on the back of a course syllabus in handwriting as neat as a typewriter. Request in writing, certified mail, return receipt, ask for the account's overdraft election documentation and the conversion consent record, and file with the State Division and the Federal Bureau, both because a single complaint is a ticket in a queue and a pattern is a file. Then she put her pen away and said, "They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of the number of you." I walked her out to her car. She said it was good to see me and that I still stand like a man waiting for a machine to finish a cycle, and I said something that was not clever. And I noticed on the drive home that I had combed my hair before I came, which I had not done deliberately, and I decided not to examine that any further that particular week. That night I did the arithmetic that turned this from a grievance into a project, and I did it with the only expertise I own. How many people are we talking about? Nobody would tell me that, but I did not need anybody to tell me, because I had serviced all 3 Colwyn building and savings branches for 11 years before the sale, and a cash recycler keeps a running count. And I know what those machines moved on a Friday, and I know how many cassette fills Ferron Street took in a month, and I know the teller station count at all three. You can back into an account base from throughput, the same way you can back into a household from a water meter. They're afraid of the number of you. I walked her out to her car. She said it was good to see me, and that I still stand like a man waiting for a machine to finish a cycle, and I said something that was not clever. And I noticed on the drive home that I had combed my hair before I came, which I had not done deliberately, and I decided not to examine that any further that particular week. That night I did the arithmetic that turned this from a grievance into a project, and I did it with the only expertise I own. How many people are we talking about? Nobody would tell me that, but I did not need anybody to tell me, because I had serviced all three Colwyn building and savings branches for 11 years before the sale, and a cash recycler keeps a running count, and I know what those machines moved on a Friday, and I know how many cassette fills Ferrand Street took in a month, and I know the teller station count at all three. You can back into an account base from throughput, the same way you can back into a household from a water meter. I sat there with a calculator, and my own notebooks from 2013 through 2019 spread across the kitchen table until 1 in the morning, and I came out between 9 and 11,000 active accounts at conversion. Then I wrote 11,000 on a clean line, and next to it I wrote $400, which was the low end of what the three of us had been taken for, and I did the multiplication with a pencil like a man who did not want to believe the calculator. $4,400,000. I sat in a kitchen on Sedge Street with a window unit running and 200 and change in a coffee can and looked at that number. And then I looked at the real problem, which is that there is no way on God's earth to count 11,000 people except to ask them, and a laid-off man with a flip phone cannot ask 11,000 people. He can ask one room. So on Friday morning, I walked into the Elks on Chapel and rented the downstairs hall for a Tuesday night for $40 I did not have, and Ellis behind the bar took 20 and told me to bring the rest whenever, and I stood out on the sidewalk afterward genuinely frightened, because I had just committed to standing up in front of my own town and saying a thing I could still not entirely prove. Alma Farah ran the cafeteria at Colwyn Mills Elementary for 33 years, and what that means, which I did not fully appreciate until that week, is that she has fed 3 generations of this town and knows which of them are on which shift. She made the calls from her kitchen phone with a church directory and a legal pad, 6 hours a day for 4 days, and she is 71, and her handwriting gets loopy when she's tired, and she filled 9 pages. Teo Salcedo took a stack of flyers around to the other trucks, and the 2 laundromats and the tire place on 2 on 24. And he did something I had not thought of, which is that he talked to the other small vendors, the flower stand, the guy who does mobile detailing, the woman who runs the cleaning crew with 4 employees, because he knew, in a way I did not, that people running 80 small transactions a week on a thin account were getting hit worst and were the most ashamed of it. And June built the intake. That was entirely her. She said, and I'm quoting, "Dad, you're going to stand up there and 60 people are going to talk at you at once, and you're going to try to write it all in a notebook, and you're going to lose half of it." Then she built a numbered sign-in sheet and a 1-page form on the towing outfit's copier, and a spreadsheet on her laptop with columns for name, branch, whether they were Colwyn before October 2019, and date of first fee. She said it was the same as running a tow board on a snow night. I told her I'd pay her for the copies. She looked at me like I'd spit on the floor. The hardest thing that week was writing the flyer, and it took me 11 drafts. Everything I wanted to write was something I could not prove. I could not write that the bank had done anything wrong, because a man saying that on a flyer in a town of 19,000 people is a man who gets a letter from a law firm and deserves one. So what it finally said was this, and nothing else. Were you a customer of Colwyn Building and Savings before October 2019? Bring your bank statements. Bring nothing else. Nothing is for sale. Elks downstairs, Tuesday 7 p.m. And then I put out coffee. I want to tell you about the coffee, because I stood in the Kroger on the Monday holding a canister of the store brand doing math on whether I could afford it, and what I was actually thinking about was the air pots and the little tub of creamers and the plate of danishes with the fruit that glowed in a room in Sandusky in June, and how I had known the whole shape of that day before anybody said a word. So I bought the coffee, and I got there at 5 and set it up myself on a folding table, and I put out a plate of cookies from the day-old rack, and it cost me $19 I did not have, and I am telling you that it was the single best $19 I have ever spent, because it said something in a language this town speaks fluently. Somebody has gone to a little trouble for you. I expected 12 people. 63 came. They came in slow and they stood at the back the way people do, and a heavy-set man in a Bassett feed cap said loudly, before I'd said one word, "What are you selling?" And I said, "Nothing, and I don't want your account number, and if you want to leave when I'm done, I'll hold the door." Then I told them what happened to me. All of it, including the shame part, including the part where I said out loud that I'd let it happen and thought it was my own carelessness for 2 weeks, and the room got very quiet in a way I have thought about many nights since, because a room only goes that quiet when a lot of people are recognizing something at the same time. A woman near the coffee said she'd been paying it for 4 years and had stopped telling her husband. A retired shop teacher named Warren Delp, 81 years old, said he'd been in twice and been told it was how it posts. Somebody said, "Well, if you don't have the money, you shouldn't spend it," which is the sentence that keeps this whole thing running in every town in this country, and there was some agreement in the room and I did not know what to say to that. Then Alma Farrar stood up in the 3rd row with her purse in her lap. She did not raise her voice. She has never raised her voice in her life. She said, "I never asked anybody to cover me. If I'm short, I'm short. I'd just wait for the 3rd Wednesday." And she sat down. And that was the end of the argument in that room forever, because half those people had been fed by that woman when they were 7 years old, and every one of them knew she had never in her life taken a thing she hadn't earned. 91 people filed a written request for their own records in the 9 days after that meeting. I did not file one of them. Every single person filed their own, certified, and June kept the numbers, and Corinne Bax never touched any of it. And what came back built the pattern I could not have built alone. Everybody's first fee landed between November of 2019 and February of 2020. Not one person, not one, out of 91, could produce a signed election. And 4 of them still had the original 2019 conversion packet in a drawer, because some people keep everything. God bless them. And all 4 packets had the same form number in the corner, CBS ELE 1019. And all 4 of those people said they had mailed it back. And Warren Delp, 81 years old, retired shop teacher, 31 years of woodshop, went home after that meeting and came back the next morning with a green certified mail receipt from October of 2019 in a Ziploc bag. Because he had sent it certified, because he does not trust the mail, stamped and dated. A receipt proving that 3rd Meridian received a piece of mail from him a full month before the first fee ever hit his account. That was the first hard thing anybody had that wasn't my own handwriting, and I held it in the parking lot of the Elks, with my hands not entirely steady. And then, 2 days after that meeting, the summer went back to work on me. Wednesday's mail brought a letter on 3rd Meridian stationery, informing me that the institution had elected to close my account at its discretion, effective in 30 days, and that the remaining balance would be remitted by check to the address on file, which is a thing a bank is allowed to do and which I had been half expecting, and which still landed in my chest like a hand. And then at 6:40 on Thursday morning my phone rang, and it was Marv Euler calling from the truck in his own driveway before he went in, and he did not say hello. He said, "Russ, they moved it up. The truck's coming tomorrow." Not the 2nd of October. Tomorrow. I was on Depot Road by 7:40 that Friday morning with no plan worth the name, and I want to be honest about the state I was in, because it was not the state of a man in a movie. I was in the state of a man who has not slept and has decided to drive somewhere because driving feels like doing something. The shredding truck was already in the lot when I came through the gate, one of those cross-cut units the size of a fire engine with a hopper on the back. And the driver was standing beside it drinking a Mountain Dew at 7:40 in the morning and looking at his phone. And I sat in my truck about 40 feet away with both hands on the wheel and had to consciously decide not to make the worst decision of my life. Because I thought about it. I want that on the record too. For about 90 seconds, I genuinely considered walking into that pole barn and taking a box that did not belong to me. And what stopped me was not virtue. It was arithmetic. A man who steals a record cannot ever again be a man whose records are worth anything. The whole value of 31 notebooks in a milk crate is that not one line in them was ever obtained by a person willing to cheat. You spend that once and it is gone forever. And then Alma Ferrar's $432 is gone with it. I want that on the record too. For about 90 seconds, I genuinely considered walking into that pole barn and taking a box that did not belong to me. And what stopped me was not virtue, it was arithmetic. A man who steals a record cannot ever again be a man whose records are worth anything. The whole value of 31 notebooks in a milk crate is that not one line in them was ever obtained by a person willing to cheat. You spend that once and it is gone forever. And then Alma Ferrar's $432 is gone with it. Marv Euler came out of the office at 10 of 8 with a clipboard and did not look surprised to see me. And what he did next was the least dramatic act of courage I have ever personally witnessed, and I have thought about it more than almost anything else in this whole business. He did not hide anything. He did not sneak a box out to my truck, which I would not have taken and which he never offered. He walked over to the pole barn, unlocked the west door, and pulled 14 boxes off the Region 4 shelving onto a pallet, 2019 and 2020, the 2 years covering the third meridian conversion and everything after. And he shrink-wrapped that pallet himself, and he tagged it Hold, and then he went inside and wrote an email to his regional director, citing the company's own retention policy, Section 4-something, which says that service history for an active client site is retained through the life of the account relationship, plus 7 years. He put my name nowhere in it. He copied the compliance mailbox. He asked for a read receipt. And then he went out and told the driver from the shredding company that the pallet by the west door was not going in the hopper today, and the driver, who had approximately no opinion about any of this, said, "Okay," and asked where the bathroom was. That is what it looks like when a 61-year-old man with 14 months to his pension does the right thing. It looks like a memo. Nobody's shirt gets torn. His director wrote back at 2:40 that afternoon, 6 hours later, one word, fine. They shredded 11 pallets that day and kept one, and Marv let me stand in the doorway while he logged the held boxes, which was his job and which he did with a pen. And somewhere in that hour, watching a man count boxes, I heard my own sentence come back at me, the one I had said out loud in that same building 2 weeks earlier, that a client will absolutely fight you over 22 minutes. Third Meridian fought everything. Third Meridian had a whole department in Columbus, whose entire function was fighting invoices. I asked Marv whether the annex had the billing files or just the tickets, and he said both, west wall, and I asked him for the 2019 accounts receivable box for Region 4, and he set it on the pallet jack and let me open it myself. Vandergrift kept a separate folder for every disputed invoice because you do not win an argument with a bank by remembering things. And in November of 2019, Third Meridian's accounts payable department in Columbus had disputed the 22 minutes. 22 minutes at the on-site rate is somewhere around $41. A bank with 100 and some branches went to the trouble of formally disputing $41, and Vandergrift's billing clerk did what she always did, which was print the delay photo off the ticket and staple it to the response and mail it back with a cover letter that said, in effect, "Here is your obstruction, pay your bill." And they paid it. And the file sat in a box on a steel shelf in a pole barn in Sandusky for 6 years. It was 4 folders back behind a dispute over a coin sorter in Bellevue. A 4x6 print, a little dark, the way those laptop cameras were. And there is a date and time burned into the corner in white letters, the way we had the software set. 10/12/2019, 14:51. It shows the northeast corridor of the Third Meridian branch on Ferrand Street, which I could identify from the floor transition strip alone, and it shows 2 grey United States Postal Service tubs on the floor against the wall, and they are full of envelopes standing on edge, sealed, hundreds of them, and the tub in front is tipped enough that you can see the top row clearly, and at the right edge of the frame, out of focus, half out of the shot because he was walking and I was not photographing him, there is a young man in a dark polo with a headset on. I stood in that pole barn, holding a photograph of the worst thing that had happened to 9,000 of my neighbors, and my second thought, I'm not going to pretend it was my first, was that I was also holding a photograph that could end a 34-year-old man's career, a man whose father did 31 years at Whirlpool in Marion, a man who had told me to take the money, in a voice I have not been able to forget. And I sat in the truck in that gravel lot for a long time, because I have never wanted to be the kind of man who does the right thing carelessly. So I went and saw him first. That was on the Monday, and I did not do it at the branch. I waited in the lot at the Sunoco on 224 where I knew he got gas, which sounds like an ambush and was one, and I want to say plainly that I am not proud of the staging, even though I am at peace with the errand. I told Dane Quillen I had something to show him before anybody else saw it, and I showed him the photograph on the hood of my truck, and he looked at it for about 8 seconds, and then he put both hands on the fender and looked at the ground. He said, I asked twice. He said he was 27, third week on the conversion team, brought in from Toledo because he was good with the software, and there were tubs of returned mail and a conversion table and a deadline of Sunday at 6 a.m. When the branches opened on the new core, and he asked the ops lead on Friday and again on Saturday, and was told they'd be handled by the back office, and by the time he got promoted to a branch of his own 2 years ago, he had told himself a version of that weekend he could live inside. Then he said, You asked me if I remembered saying it. He meant, leave 'em. That's the ones who wrote back. He said he had remembered it every day since the Tuesday I walked into his lobby in a grey jacket. He didn't ask me not to send it. He asked me one question, which was whether Ruth Ann was going to be all right, and I said I did not know, and he nodded like a man receiving a bill he had been expecting. Ruth Ann Pike found me. 9 days after the Elks meeting, she pulled into my driveway on Sedge Street after her shift and did not get out of the car. So I went and stood at the window, and she said, 22 years, Russ, which was the entire argument, both sides of it, in 3 words. 22 years of a job in a town that has maybe 6 of that kind left. She has a pension, a mortgage with 9 years on it, and a son who does not currently speak to her, which I did not know and which is not my story to tell. And then she reached into the console and handed me an index card, laminated, curled at one corner from 22 years in an apron pocket and about 4,000 trips through the dishwasher of a woman's hands. It was a teller reference card, the kind you keep at the station for wire limits and hold policies, and on the back, under the heading Suggested Responses, Fee Inquiries, printed by somebody in a marketing department, there were 4 lines, and the second one said, That's just how it posts. She said, I've said that sentence to people I've known since kindergarten. She said it to Alma Farrar. She said it to Warren Delp twice. And she said the thing that I think about when I think about what this country does to decent people in ordinary jobs. I knew it was wrong the way you know a smell is wrong. I just never once had a piece of paper that said so. She signed. I had asked her for one signature, hers, and she signed a 2-page statement about the 2019 conversion mailing and about the tubs and about the card. And then she did the thing I had not thought to ask for and could never have done myself. She went and got the others. Because a teller who has been at one branch for 22 years knows exactly where everybody went. There were 12 people who worked that conversion weekend at the Ferron Street branch, counting her. 1 died in 2022. 2 would not return a call. The other 8 she got. A head teller who lives in Port Clinton now and does taxes, an operations clerk who moved to Ocala and signed hers in front of a notary in a UPS store and mailed it back with a note about the humidity. A woman who is a school secretary in Bucyrus now and cried on the phone, Ruth Ann said, for 11 minutes before she said yes. 9 statements, 9 signatures, all of them saying substantially the same 4 facts. That a mailing went out in September of 2019, that returned envelopes accumulated in tubs in the back corridor, that they were told the back office would handle them, and that they never saw them again. That page of names went to the State Division of Financial Institutions on the 24th of September, with the photograph, the service ticket, the billing dispute file, Warren Delp's certified receipt, and 91 account histories in a flat-rate box that cost me $9.65 at the post office on Chapel. The bank answered in October, and their answer nearly finished me. Third Meridian's response to the 91 records requests was not a denial. It was better than a denial from their end. They produced election records. For every single one of the 91 accounts, they produced an electronic record of a courtesy coverage election, with a date, with an operator ID, with a batch number, all of it neat. all of it in a PDF 300 and some pages long that landed in June's email at 11 at night, because she was the one with the email. 91 people had told me to my face in a rented hall that they never signed anything, and here was a bank document saying every one of them had. I sat at that kitchen table and looked at it and felt the floor go out, and I will tell you exactly what went through my head, which was not noble. It was that Ruth Ann Pike had put 22 years on the table, and 8 other people had put their names down, and I had walked away from $512 with my daughter's fee coming due, and I had brought all of them to a place where a corporation could simply produce a piece of paper that said no. June said, "Dad." She said it twice. And then she said, "You always tell me the machine's log doesn't lie, it just tells the truth about the wrong thing." And I looked at the first page again, and I saw the batch numbers. Here is the thing about me that is either my one gift or my one defect, depending on which member of my family you ask. I have spent 29 years being lied to by machines, and machines are terrible liars. Because a machine will lie to you about the conclusion and tell you the absolute truth about the sequence. A recycler will tell you it counted 4,200 notes, and it will be wrong, but the note path event log underneath it will show you every single hesitation in order, and the order is where the truth lives. Nobody edits the order. Nobody thinks about the order. So I printed all 311 pages at the library at 10 cents a page, $31.10, which I remember because I had to go home and get more money, and I cleared the kitchen table, and I sorted 91 election records 4 different ways over about 19 hours across 2 days, the way you sort a fault log, and it took me until about 4 in the morning on the second night to see it. Every one of those 91 elections had been keyed by 3 operator IDs on the 9th, 10th and 13th of January 2020. Not October, not November. January, 3 months after the conversion, 91 accounts belonging to people all over 4 zip codes, keyed in 11 big blocks in 3 days by 3 people. That is not what consent looks like arriving 1 envelope at a time. That is what a cleanup project looks like. And then the sequence. Every image document in that core carries a batch number, sequential, assigned when the scanner takes it. The returned mail images from the Colwyn conversion ran from batch 1001 through batch 1043, and I laid them out on the table in order like a hand of solitaire. And after 1043, the sequence jumps to 1087, 43 batch numbers with nothing behind them. And I already knew what a batch held because it was in their own header on every page. 40 documents to a batch, standard tray. 43 times 40 is 1,720. 1,720 documents that were assigned a place in the sequence and never imaged, in a range whose neighbors are date-stamped the 2nd and 3rd weeks of October 2019. And Warren Delp's certified mail receipt, that green card in a Ziploc bag from an 81-year-old shop teacher who does not trust the mail, is stamped October 8, 2019, dead inside that hole. I did the last part at 4 in the morning with a pencil because I did not trust myself. 2 USPS gray tubs. A standard tub holds somewhere between 800 and 1,000 of those business envelopes standing on edge. 2 tubs, 1,720 missing images. I sat in that kitchen and understood that I was looking at a photograph and a subtraction problem that agreed with each other to within a couple hundred envelopes. And I put my head down on my own kitchen table on Sedge Street, and I cried, which I had not done since my mother's funeral. And I am 53 years old, and I'm not going to apologize for it here. It went to the Examiner on the 19th of October in a 3-ring binder with tabs, because Corinne Back said examiners are people with 200 files, and you should never make a person hunt. That was day 77, counting from the Tuesday I put on a grey jacket to go close an account, which is 11 weeks, which is the whole of what I ever did about any of this. And then nothing happened. For 5 weeks, absolutely nothing happened, and nobody who has never filed a complaint against an institution understands how loud that silence is. Meanwhile, it was September before all that, and I have skipped over September on purpose, so let me go back and do it honestly, because it is the part of this story I'm actually proudest of, and it has nothing to do with a bank. June's fee was due the 15th, and I had 200 and change. What I did was go see Teo Salcedo and ask him who in this town has a machine that eats money and no one to fix it. And Teo laughed and made a list in about 4 minutes, because he is a man who talks to everybody. The laundromat on Cass had 2 changers down and had been feeding quarters out of a coffee can behind the counter for a year and a half. The car wash on 224 had a bill acceptor that took 5s and pretended it hadn't. The arcade at the marina in Port Clinton. The vending route guy who services 11 counties and does not have time to open a coin mech. Nobody drives out for one machine. That is the whole business, right there. And it had been sitting under my nose for 29 years while I drove past those places on my way to somebody else's branch. Her 400 was still going in, whatever happened. She had put it away at 20 at a time since January, and I was not going to be the reason it came back out. So the number that was actually mine was 210. I made $445 in 18 days with the tools I did not pawn, and I have never in my life been that proud of $445. We drove to the bursar's office in Fremont on the 14th and paid it together, her 400 and my 210 in one envelope, and I sat in the truck afterward and had to take a minute, because I had spent the whole summer trying to be the man who protected my daughter, and what I got instead was a partner, and it turns out that is better, and it is not close. The letter came on the 23rd of November. Not a verdict. I want to be careful with everybody's expectations here, because television has ruined people for how this actually goes. It was a notice that the division had opened a formal examination of the institution's overdraft election records for accounts converted from Colwyn Building and Savings, and that they had referred it up, and there was a file number. That's it. That's what 11 weeks and a milk crate and 9 signatures buys you. A file number and a promise that somebody with a badge is going to go look. I read it standing at the mailbox in my coat, and then I walked it over to Alma Farrar's kitchen and read it to her out loud, and she made me read the second paragraph twice, and then that woman put her hand flat on the table and said, "Well, just that." And then she asked me if I wanted a piece of pie, and I said yes, and we sat there. And I thought about the fact that a 71-year-old woman had paid $432 to a corporation for the crime of being 3 days early on a kerosene bill, and that her entire celebration of the first evidence that anyone on earth believed her was 1 syllable and a pie. 3 days later, a woman from a law firm in Cleveland called my house at 8 in the morning, and after about 90 seconds of introducing herself, she stopped and asked me a question nobody had ever asked me in my life, which was how many notebooks I had. The 11 weeks were mine. The 14 months after that were theirs, and I had almost nothing to do with them, which is its own lesson about how this works. There were examiners and there were lawyers, and at some point a firm out of Cleveland took an interest, and my binder became an exhibit with a letter and a number on it, and I gave a deposition in a conference room in Toledo in the following June that lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. And the only difficult part of it was that a very polite young attorney asked me the same 9 questions in a slightly different order each time to see whether my answers would move. And they did not move, because they were not memories. They were copied off pages I wrote down in a spiral notebook on the day. In January, 16 months after Ruth Ann Pike handed me a laminated index card through a car window, Third Meridian entered into a consent agreement, admitted no wrongdoing, they never do and everybody should stop expecting them to, and agreed to a look-back on every account converted from the Colwyn book. 7,460 accounts got a refund. $2.9 million with interest. Average check $394. Alma Farrar got $432. Teo Salcedo got $1,116. Warren Delp got $216 and a green certified mail receipt back. And he had the receipt framed, and it hangs in the community room at the senior center on Chapel, where he now spends 2 mornings a week helping people write letters they are afraid to write, which he says is more interesting than woodshop and pays about the same. And I got $412 that were never supposed to be findable in a check with a window envelope, and I did not frame it. I put it in the coffee can. I want to tell you what it cost, because the version of this story where a man is simply vindicated is a lie, and it would be an insult to anybody watching who is currently in the middle of something. It cost me the account and the branch, which sounds like nothing and is not, because at 53 I had to go establish myself somewhere new, and the credit union in Tiffin makes you come in person. It cost me 2 friendships, one of which I miss. There is a man in this town, a good man, who thinks I made a spectacle of a thing that should have been handled privately. And he is polite to me at the hardware store, and we are done, and there is nothing to be done about that. It did not fix my marriage, which ended in 2016 for reasons that had nothing to do with any bank. It did not make me relaxed about money. I check the balance twice a day now, morning and night, which my daughter says is not a personality flaw, but is not one either. And it did not make me brave, which is the thing people most want to believe. I was scared the entire time. I was scared in the pole barn. I was scared in the Elks Hall in front of 63 people. I was scared standing at Dane Quillen's fender with a photograph on my truck hood. The only thing I ever actually did was write down what happened on the day it happened, for 29 years for no reason, out of a habit I picked up because somebody once let me spend 9 days thinking I might be a thief. Here is where everybody ended up, which is the part I care about most. Kadera Machine Service has been a real business for 2 years and change now. CoinMex bill validators, changers, car wash acceptors, the vending stuff nobody will drive out for, 61 accounts across 3 counties out of a used Transit with 140,000 miles on it, and a part-time kid named Deshawn who is 19 and better with the electronics than I will ever be, and who I am making take the electronics program at Terra, whether he likes it or not. 2 law firms have paid me at $65 an hour to read vendor service records, maybe 40 hours a year total. And I want to be very clear that this is not a career, and I am not an expert witness. It is a thing I can do that nobody else wants to do. I clear more than I did at Vandergrift about half the months. Teo Salcedo opened El Cardinal in the storefront on Water Street 11 months after his check cleared. 3 doors down from the pawn shop where I almost sold my tools. And he keeps a notebook now, a real one. And he shows it to me like a kid with a report card, and I tell him his columns are crooked. Alma Farrar had the glazing on Dell's greenhouse redone, and now starts about 600 seedlings every February for the garden at Colwyn Mills Elementary. So after 33 years of feeding those kids lunch, she is back to feeding them anyway, on her own terms, at 73. Ruth Ann Pike stayed 9 more months and then went to the credit union in Tiffin, where they gave her a desk and a title and a phone, and she says the strangest part is that when somebody asks her about a fee, she is allowed to just tell them. She gave me the index card. It is taped inside the back cover of Notebook 32 in the milk crate in the closet of the 2nd bedroom. Dane Quillen was put on administrative leave during the examination and then reassigned, and he is an assistant manager at a branch in Marion now, which is his father's town, and I have wondered 100 times whether that was a punishment or a mercy or just where the opening was. He mailed me a copy of the written records request he filed on my behalf, the one I asked him for across a laminate table with his own signature on it and the date, and no note. I understood the note. Marv Euler made it to 62 and change and retired in March, and they gave him a cake in the same room where they laid me off, which he told me about on the phone, laughing so hard he had to stop. June Kadera sat for her boards in May and passed, and she is a sonographer at the hospital in Fremont 2nd shift, and the first thing she ever scanned as a licensed tech was a gallbladder, and she called me from the parking garage to tell me so. And Corinne Bax and I have dinner every 2nd Thursday, and about once a month she rides along on a service call and reads while I work, and she still will not call anybody on anybody's behalf, and I have stopped asking, and that is exactly the arrangement 2 careful people in their 50s should have. Neither of us has said one large word to the other. Neither of us needs to. She was right about the things she said in the parking lot on Croghan Street, by the way, and it is the truest sentence anybody said to me the whole time. They were never afraid of me. They were afraid of the number of us. I have thought a lot about what I would want somebody to take from this, and it is not that you should fight your bank, and it is definitely not that a man with a notebook can beat a corporation, because a man with a notebook cannot. 91 people beat that corporation. 9 women and men who worked a conversion weekend in 2019 and signed their names to what they saw beat that corporation. What one man with a notebook can do is be the person who is still holding a dated piece of paper on the day everyone else needs one, and that is not a talent, it is a habit, and it is available to absolutely everybody watching this, and it costs about 70 cents at the drugstore. The other thing, and I say this to the 50-year-olds especially, the reason I could read that batch sequence at 4 in the morning is that I spent 29 years doing a boring job well. Nobody was impressed by it. There is no award for the man who knows that a branch on Ferrand Street has a humidity problem in February. And then one Tuesday a screen turns a man's face white, and it turns out that the only person in the county who can read what is on it is the guy who was under the counter the whole time. Your 29 years are not nothing just because nobody has ever asked you about them. They are inventory, and the day somebody finally asks, you will be shocked at how fast it comes back. Last thing. In August, I was ashamed. That is the part I would most want to reach back and say something to, because I sat at that table for an hour, absolutely certain that $412 was a verdict on my character, that I was careless, that I had let it happen, that I deserved some percentage of it. Every single one of those 91 people believed the same thing about themselves. That is not an accident, and it is not a coincidence. Shame is the quietest fee they charge, and it is the one that keeps everything else running. And the moment Alma Ferrar stood up in a rented hall with her purse in her lap and said, "If I'm short, I'm short," it stopped working in that room forever. So here is what I want from you in the comments, and I want the specific thing, not the general one. Warren Delp paid a few dollars extra in October of 2019 to send one envelope certified, because he is 81 and does not trust the mail, and 6 years later that little green card was the first hard proof any of us had that wasn't just my handwriting. Tell me about the piece of paper you kept that everybody told you didn't need, the receipt, the work order, the text you screenshotted, the date you wrote on the back of an envelope. What was it? And did you ever get to use it? I would genuinely like to know how many of us are out here holding something. And if you know somebody whose garage or hall closet everybody in the family makes fun of, the one who keeps every statement and every manual, send this to them today and let them have one good afternoon. If you'll have us back, hit subscribe. This town has more of these than I have time to tell you, and somebody in every one of them wrote it down.